You can't afford to sit here. Move to the back where you belong. Flight attendant Karen Mitchell points aggressively toward economy class, her finger jabbing the air like a weapon. Delia Washington, 45, sits frozen in seat 1A, her boarding pass trembling slightly in her hand. Beside her, Trevor Washington, 48, instinctively leans forward to protect his wife. Karen steps closer, blocking their aisle completely. "Did you hear me? These seats are for real first-class passengers." The cabin erupts in whispers. Phones discreetly start recording. Delia's voice stays dangerously calm. "We have valid tickets for these seats." Karen laughs, a sharp, cruel sound that makes everyone wince. "Honey, I know exactly what you people can and can't afford." She has no idea she just made the biggest mistake of her career. 3 hours earlier, Delia Washington sat in the sterile conference room of the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters in Washington, D.C., reviewing a thick manila folder marked Operation Clean Skies, Confidential. "The complaints are getting worse," said Regional Administrator Lisa Thompson, sliding another stack of documents across the polished table. "We're seeing a pattern of discriminatory behavior across multiple airlines, but this one carrier keeps appearing in our reports." Delia nodded, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. As senior FAA safety inspector with 15 years of experience, she'd seen plenty of aviation industry problems, but the civil rights violations were becoming impossible to ignore. Trevor leaned back in his chair, his pilot's instincts already analyzing the data. 20 years of flight operations experience had taught him to spot systemic failures. "Look at these incident reports," he said, tapping a highlighted section. "Same flight attendant mentioned in 12 separate discrimination complaints over the past 18 months. Karen Mitchell," Lisa confirmed. "A 12-year veteran, but her recent performance reviews show concerning patterns. Multiple passengers report being questioned about their ticket validity, asked to provide credit cards as proof they belong in premium cabins." Delia's jaw tightened. She'd experienced enough workplace discrimination in her own career to recognize the coded language. And the airline's response? Standard corporate playbook. Apologize to complainants, offer travel vouchers, claim it was a misunderstanding. No actual disciplinary action. Trevor studied the flight manifest on his tablet. "So we go undercover, document everything, and see how deep this really goes." "Exactly. You'll be traveling as regular passengers on Flight 447 tomorrow morning. Premium tickets, standard booking process. If there's systematic discrimination happening, we need federal documentation to force real change." Lisa's expression grew serious. "Remember, you're not there to entrap anyone. Just observe normal operations and document any safety protocol violations or civil rights issues you witness." As they gathered their materials, Delia's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Have a safe flight tomorrow. First class sounds fancy." If only she knew, Delia thought, sliding the confidential files into her carry-on bag. The next morning, at the same airline's crew briefing room, Karen Mitchell was already setting the tone for her day. "I don't know what's happening with passenger screening lately," she complained to lead flight attendant Brad Stevens as they reviewed the manifest. "We're getting more and more people trying to game the system, sitting in seats they clearly can't afford." Brad shifted uncomfortably. He'd worked with Karen for 3 years and had grown increasingly concerned about her attitude toward certain passengers. "Karen, we should probably focus on safety protocols rather than making assumptions about passengers' financial situations." "Come on, Brad. You've been doing this long enough to know when something's off." Karen's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "I can spot the fraudulent upgrades from across the cabin. It's about maintaining standards." Other crew members exchanged glances. Flight attendant Maria Rodriguez had filed 2 separate reports about Karen's behavior with human resources, but nothing had come of them. The company seemed more interested in avoiding complaints than addressing them. "Just remember," Brad said carefully, "our job is passenger safety and service, nothing else." Karen waved him off, already heading toward the gate. "Trust me, I know exactly how to handle problem passengers." At the departure gate, Delia and Trevor sat quietly, reviewing their tablets like any other business travelers. Delia's screen showed what appeared to be quarterly sales reports, but the documents were actually FAA compliance guidelines for crew anti-discrimination training. Trevor was reading what looked like industry magazines, but his focus was on recent safety violation reports from this exact airline. "Remember," Delia murmured, "we document everything, but we don't provoke anything. If there's discriminatory behavior, it needs to happen naturally so our evidence holds up in federal court." Trevor nodded, his eyes tracking the crew as they prepared for boarding. Years of pilot training had taught him to observe human behavior for safety risks. What he was seeing in Karen Mitchell's interactions with gate agents was already concerning. She'd made disparaging comments about 3 different passenger groups, questioned the validity of an elderly man's upgrade, and openly rolled her eyes when a family with young children approached the premium boarding line. "She's already violating basic customer service protocols," Trevor noted quietly. "If this is how she behaves in public, I can only imagine what happens once we're on the aircraft." As boarding began, Delia felt the familiar weight of federal responsibility on her shoulders. They weren't just passengers today, they were the eyes and ears of aviation justice. Neither of them could have predicted just how badly this was about to go. The boarding process moves smoothly until Delia and Trevor reach the aircraft door. Karen Mitchell stands at the entrance, checking boarding passes with theatrical authority, her smile plastic and conditional. "Welcome aboard," she says warmly to the white businessman ahead of them. "Enjoy your flight in first class, Mr. Carter." When Delia approaches, Karen's demeanor shifts instantly. Her smile vanishes. She examines Delia's boarding pass like it might be counterfeit currency, holding it up to the light, flipping it over, studying the barcode with suspicious intensity. Karen mutters loud enough for other passengers to hear. "This is unusual." "Is there a problem?" Delia asks calmly, though her pulse quickens. She can feel Trevor's protective energy radiating behind her. "Well, these first-class seats weren't purchased at full price," Karen announces, as if she's uncovered a conspiracy. "You'll need to speak with the gate agent about proper seat assignments." Trevor steps forward slightly. "Our tickets were purchased through standard corporate travel. Everything should be in order." Karen's eyes narrow as she takes in Trevor's appearance, his confident posture, his expensive watch, his professional demeanor. It only seems to irritate her more. "Sir, I'm going to need you both to step aside while I verify these tickets with my supervisor." Behind them, the boarding line begins to back up. Passengers crane their necks to see what's causing the delay. Robert Carter, the businessman Karen had warmly welcomed moments earlier, pulls out his phone and starts recording. Lead flight attendant Brad Stevens appears from the galley, sensing trouble. "Karen, what's the issue here?" "These passengers have questionable first-class tickets," Karen says, her voice carrying throughout the boarding area. "I think there's been a system error." Brad examines the boarding passes. They're clearly legitimate. Proper barcodes, correct flight information, valid seat assignments. "These look fine to me, Karen. Let's get them seated so we can continue boarding." But Karen isn't backing down. If anything, Brad's contradiction seems to fuel her determination. "Brad, I've been doing this for 12 years. I know when something doesn't add up." She turns back to Delia and Trevor, her voice growing louder and more aggressive. "You need to show me the credit card used to purchase these tickets." The request hangs in the air like a slap. Several passengers gasp audibly. Maria Santos, seated in 1D, looks horrified. "Excuse me?" Delia's voice remains controlled, but there's steel underneath. "Are you requiring all first-class passengers to show their credit cards or just us?" Karen's face flushes red. She knows she's crossed a line, but pride won't let her retreat. "Ma'am, when tickets appear suspicious, we have protocols." "What exactly appears suspicious about our tickets?" Trevor interrupts, his pilot training evident in his systematic approach to the question. "Well," Karen sputters, "the booking code shows these were purchased through a corporate account, but you two obviously aren't executives." The words hang in the cabin like toxic gas. Even passengers still in the jetway can hear the confrontation now. Robert Carter's phone camera captures everything as Karen continues her tirade. "I see this all the time. People using company cards for personal travel or getting charity upgrades they're not entitled to. These seats cost more than most people make in a month." Maria Santos finally speaks up from her seat. "This is completely inappropriate. Their tickets are clearly valid." Karen whirls around. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay out of this." I'm trained to spot fraudulent passengers. Fraudulent? Delia repeats, her voice dangerously quiet. What exactly makes us fraudulent? But Karen is too deep in her power trip to recognize the warning signs. Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but when people who clearly can't afford first class show up with premium tickets, red flags go up. It's my job to protect the airline from fraud. The cabin has become a pressure cooker. Every passenger is watching, recording, witnessing history in the making. Trevor begins reaching for his wallet, but Delia places a gentle hand on his arm. Her expression is unreadable, but there's something in her eyes that suggests she's making calculations Karen couldn't begin to understand. We're not showing you our credit cards, Delia says firmly. Our tickets are valid. We've committed no crime and we're taking our seats. Karen's control snaps completely. No, you are not taking those seats, she shouts, pointing aggressively toward economy class. Security! I need security to escort these passengers to their proper section. Brad tries one more time to intervene. Karen, this has gone too far. Brad, either you support your crew or you don't. Karen cuts him off. These people are trying to steal premium services they didn't pay for. Captain James Rodriguez emerges from the cockpit, drawn by the commotion. 25 years of flying has taught him to recognize when situations are spiraling out of control. What's happening here? He asks, his authority immediately commanding attention. Captain, we have passengers with questionable first-class tickets, Karen explains, her voice now taking on a victim's tone. They're being aggressive and refusing to cooperate with verification procedures. Captain Rodriguez looks at the boarding passes, then at Delia and Trevor. His pilot instincts tell him something is very wrong with this picture, but Karen is his crew member. Ma'am, sir, if you could just work with us to resolve this misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Trevor says, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command situations. We have valid tickets for these seats. Any verification can be done while we're seated. But Karen has already radioed for airport security. I need officers at Gate 23. We have passengers refusing to comply with crew instructions. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers board the aircraft. The cabin has become a circus of whispered conversations, recording phones, and growing tension. Security Chief David Kim reviews the situation quickly. Karen presents her version. These passengers have questionable tickets and became belligerent when asked for verification. They're disrupting the flight and refusing to follow crew instructions. David looks at the boarding passes. They appear completely legitimate. He glances at Robert Carter, who's still recording, then at Maria Santos, who's shaking her head in disgust. Ma'am, sir, David addresses Delia and Trevor. For the safety of all passengers, we're going to need you to deplane while we sort this out. The words hit like a physical blow. After 12 years of flying for work, countless first-class trips, impeccable travel records, Delia and Trevor are being removed from an aircraft because of their skin color. The walk down the aisle is the longest of their lives. Every passenger stares as they gather their belongings and head toward the exit. Maria Santos calls out, "This is wrong, completely wrong." Robert Carter continues recording as they pass. "I'm posting this everywhere," he says loudly enough for Karen to hear. "Everyone needs to see this." As they reach the aircraft door, Karen delivers her final insult. "Next time, maybe book seats you can actually afford." Trevor's hand clenches into a fist, but Delia's touch keeps him calm. She looks back at Karen with an expression that's impossible to read. "You have no idea what you've just done," Delia says quietly. Karen laughs triumphantly. "Honey, I know exactly what I've done. I've protected this airline from fraud." As they walk up the jetway, Trevor pulls out his phone and begins typing detailed notes about crew protocol violations, safety failures, and civil rights breaches. His pilot training makes him methodical about documentation. "How many federal violations did you count?" Delia asks quietly. "At least 6, Trevor replies. "Maybe more once we review the full sequence." Behind them, Karen is basking in her perceived victory, completely unaware that she's just committed career suicide. She has no idea that the fraudulent passengers she just humiliated are federal aviation inspectors with the power to ground her airline. The investigation that's about to begin will expose not just Karen's behavior, but an entire system that enabled it. But first, they have to file their report with airport security. And that's when everything changes. The airport security office feels sterile and institutional, with fluorescent lights humming overhead and the distant sound of announcements echoing through thin walls. Security Chief David Kim sits across from Delia and Trevor, his expression showing he's handled hundreds of these incidents, but never one that felt quite like this. "I need to get statements from all parties," David explains, opening a fresh incident report. "Miss Mitchell, let's start with your account." Karen sits rigidly in her chair, her flight attendant uniform perfectly pressed, her story rehearsed and confident. These passengers presented questionable first-class tickets and became increasingly agitated when I attempted to verify their validity. When I asked for additional identification, they became hostile and disruptive. She pauses dramatically, as if the memory is traumatic. They started arguing loudly, causing other passengers to become uncomfortable. The male passenger became particularly aggressive, raising his voice and making threatening gestures. David jots down notes, then turns to Delia and Trevor. "Your version of events?" Delia speaks with the measured tone of someone accustomed to giving official testimony. "We boarded the aircraft with valid tickets for seats 1A and 1B. Miss Mitchell immediately questioned our right to sit in first class, demanded to see our credit cards, and made several statements suggesting we couldn't afford premium seating." Trevor adds, "At no point did we raise our voices or make threatening gestures. We simply requested to take our assigned seats." Karen scoffs audibly. "That's not what happened at all. They were clearly trying to take advantage of some kind of system error." "What specifically made you believe their tickets were invalid?" David asks. Karen's confidence wavers slightly. "Well, the booking codes looked unusual, and they just didn't seem like typical first-class passengers." "What does a typical first-class passenger look like?" David presses. The question hangs in the air like smoke. Karen realizes she's walked into dangerous territory, but her pride won't let her back down. "You know what I mean," she says defensively. "People who can afford those seats." David's phone buzzes with a text message. He glances at it, and his expression changes. "I need to step out for a moment. Miss Rodriguez will continue taking statements." Airport manager Patricia Carter enters the room, her professional demeanor barely masking her concern. She's been with the airport for 15 years and knows that discrimination incidents can explode into federal lawsuits overnight. "I understand we have the passenger dispute?" Patricia asks, though her tone suggests she knows it's much more serious. Outside the office, David is reviewing security footage on his tablet with a growing alarm. The video clearly shows the entire confrontation. Karen's aggressive posturing, her pointing gestures, the moment she called security. More importantly, it captures audio of her most damaging statements. He returns to the office with a grim expression. "I've reviewed the security footage. Miss Mitchell, your account doesn't match what the cameras recorded." Karen's face pales. "What do you mean?" "The footage shows no aggressive behavior from these passengers. It does show you making statements about their ability to afford first-class seating and calling them fraudulent passengers." Patricia Carter pulls out her phone. She's already received 3 calls from passengers who witnessed the incident. Robert Carter has sent her the video he recorded, and it's already been shared on social media dozens of times. "Miss Mitchell," Patricia says carefully, "this incident is being reported on social media. We have multiple passenger witnesses, and they're all supporting Mr. and Mrs." She pauses, realizing she doesn't have their last names. "Washington," Delia supplies. "Delia and Trevor Washington." Something flickers in Patricia's expression. A hint of recognition, perhaps, or just professional instinct, sensing that this story has more layers. Karen becomes increasingly defensive as the evidence mounts against her. "I was doing my job. I was protecting the airline from fraud. If management supported their crew instead of automatically siding with complaining passengers—" "Miss Mitchell," Patricia interrupts. "At this point, the airline is conducting its own investigation. You'll be suspended pending the outcome." "Suspended?" Karen's voice cracks. "For what? For doing my job?" "For discriminatory treatment of passengers," Patricia says bluntly. "For violating company policy regarding customer service. For creating a public relations nightmare." Meanwhile, Trevor has been quietly documenting every procedural failure he's witnessed. His notebook is filled with observations about inadequate crew training, systemic failures in complaint handling, and violations of federal aviation safety protocols. Delia watches the chaos unfold with professional detachment. She's seen this pattern before. Institutional denial followed by panicked damage control. But she also knows this is just the beginning. Patricia turns to them with the airline's standard peace offering. Mr. and Mrs. Washington, the airline would like to offer you full refunds, future travel vouchers, and an upgrade to our premium rewards program. Delia's response is measured and professional. We appreciate the gesture, but this isn't about compensation. Then what would resolve this situation? Patricia asks. Delia and Trevor exchange a glance that carries years of shared experience fighting injustice. Accountability, Delia says simply. Real accountability. Patricia nods, not understanding that she's about to discover what real accountability looks like when you discriminate against federal aviation inspectors. Patricia Carter opens a fresh incident report on her tablet, her fingers poised over the digital form. After 15 years managing airport operations, she's learned that proper documentation is the difference between a resolved complaint and a federal lawsuit. I'll need to see identification from everyone involved, she says, pulling out her reading glasses. Standard procedure for any discrimination allegation. Karen shifts nervously in her chair. The word discrimination makes her uncomfortable. It suggests she did something wrong beyond just maintaining standards. This is ridiculous, Karen mutters. I was protecting the airline's interests. Patricia ignores her, focusing on the passengers who've remained remarkably calm throughout this entire ordeal. There's something about their composure that doesn't fit the typical pattern of upset travelers. Mr. and Mrs. Washington, if I could see your driver's licenses? Delia reaches into her carry-on bag, not for a wallet, but for a leather credential case. She opens it slowly, deliberately, and places it on the table. The room falls silent. Patricia's eyes widen as she reads the gold-embossed text. Federal Aviation Administration Senior Safety Inspector. Below it, Delia's official photo and federal identification number. Oh my God, Patricia whispers. Trevor quietly produces his own credentials. Federal Aviation Administration Flight Operations Inspector. Karen's face drains of all colors. Her mouth opens and closes like a fish gasping for air, but no sound comes out. Security Chief David Kim leans forward to examine the credentials, his expression grave. 20 years in airport security, and he's never seen anything like this. Your Federal Aviation Inspectors, Patricia says, her voice barely audible. Senior Inspectors, Delia corrects gently. We were conducting an unannounced compliance inspection of this airline's operations. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. This isn't just a customer service failure or even a discrimination complaint. This is a federal civil rights violation committed against the very officials responsible for regulating the aviation industry. Karen finally finds her voice, but it comes out as a strangled whisper. You're FAA? Trevor nods grimly. 15 years with the agency for my wife, 20 for me. We specialize in cabin crew protocol compliance and safety culture assessments. Patricia's hands shake as she reaches for her phone. This is beyond her authority now. This requires immediate escalation to corporate headquarters, legal departments, and crisis management teams. I need to call CEO Harrison immediately, she says, stepping toward the door. Patricia, Delia's voice stops her. Before you make that call, you should understand what just happened on that aircraft. Delia opens her tablet and begins reading from her notes in the same professional tone she uses for congressional testimony. At approximately 8:47 a.m., Flight Attendant Mitchell initiated discriminatory treatment of federal inspectors based solely on racial profiling. She demanded financial verification not required of other passengers, made public statements questioning our economic status, and forcibly removed us from the aircraft despite valid documentation. Trevor continues the litany. She violated FAA Regulations 121.580 regarding crew member training, 49 CFR Part 1542, 209 concerning airport security discrimination, and Section 40127 of Federal Aviation Law prohibiting discrimination in air transportation. Karen's breathing becomes rapid and shallow. Each regulation citation is another nail in her career coffin. But more importantly, Delia continues, she demonstrated a pattern of discriminatory behavior that suggests systemic failures in your airline's training and oversight protocols. Patricia sinks back into her chair. How How many violations are we looking at? 14 federal violations so far, Trevor says matter-of-factly. But our investigation is just beginning. The word investigation lands like a bomb. This isn't a complaint anymore. It's an official federal inspection with the power to ground aircraft, suspend operating licenses, and impose millions in fines. Security Chief David immediately understands the magnitude. Miss Mitchell, you're suspended from all duties effective immediately. You'll need to surrender your airline badge and escort credentials. Karen's hands tremble as she fumbles with her lanyard. This isn't fair. I was just doing my job. I didn't know. You didn't know what? Delia asks, her voice sharp for the first time. You didn't know that discrimination is illegal? You didn't know that federal law prohibits treating passengers differently based on race? It wasn't about race, Karen stammers. Trevor pulls out his phone and plays back audio he recorded during the confrontation. Karen's voice fills the room. People who clearly can't afford first class, you two obviously aren't executives. Next time, maybe book seats you can actually afford. The recordings are devastating. Every discriminatory statement, every assumption about their economic status, every coded phrase that reveals her racial bias. Patricia's phone buzzes continuously with emergency notifications. The passenger video has gone viral. #first-class racism is trending on Twitter. The airline stock price is already dropping in pre-market trading. This is a nightmare, Patricia mutters, scrolling through increasingly frantic messages from corporate communications. Actually, Delia says calmly, this is justice. She opens another folder on her tablet. We've been tracking discrimination complaints against this airline for 18 months. Karen Mitchell's name appears in 23 separate incident reports. 23 passengers who experienced similar treatment. Trevor adds, and based on our investigation, management was aware of these complaints but took no meaningful corrective action. Karen's supervisor, Captain Rodriguez, appears in the doorway, summoned by the emergency calls. His face shows the expression of a man watching his career implode in real time. Captain, Delia addresses him directly, were you aware that Miss Mitchell had multiple discrimination complaints in her personnel file? Rodriguez struggles to answer. There were concerns raised about customer service issues. Customer service issues? Trevor repeats. Or civil rights violations that were systematically ignored? The room fills with the silence of institutional accountability finally arriving. Every policy that was ignored, every complaint that was dismissed, every training session that was skipped, all of it led to this moment. Patricia finally makes the call she's been dreading. Mr. Harrison, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. We have federal aviation inspectors. Yes, sir. FAA inspectors. No, sir. They were passengers who were discriminated against. Yes, sir. It's already on social media. As she speaks, her voice grows increasingly strained. CEO Michael Harrison is clearly not pleased with what he's hearing. Delia and Trevor sit quietly, watching the institutional panic unfold around them. They've seen this before. The moment when organizations realize that discrimination has consequences beyond hurt feelings. What happens now? Security Chief David asks. Delia closes her tablet with quiet finality. Now this becomes an official federal investigation into discriminatory practices in commercial aviation. The FAA will conduct a comprehensive review of this airline's training protocols, complaint handling procedures, and compliance with civil rights law. She looks directly at Karen, who's crying quietly in her chair. And Miss Mitchell will face federal charges for violating the civil rights of federal officers in the performance of their duties. The truth is finally out. The passengers who were humiliated and removed from first class weren't just any travelers. They were the federal inspectors responsible for ensuring airline safety and compliance. Justice is about to be served. Within 4 hours of the incident, emergency conference calls are ricocheting between corporate boardrooms, federal offices, and legal departments across 3 time zones. The viral video has been viewed over 2 million times, and major news networks are already reaching out for statements. At FAA Regional Headquarters, Administrator Lisa Thompson convenes an emergency response team. The secure conference room is filled with senior investigators, civil rights attorneys, and aviation safety specialists. Ladies and gentlemen, Lisa begins, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. We have a code red situation. Two of our most senior inspectors were subjected to racial discrimination while conducting an official investigation. This is now a priority federal case. She clicks to the first slide of her presentation. Inspector Delia Washington has been with the agency for 15 years. Her safety assessments have grounded dangerous aircraft and saved countless lives. Inspector Trevor Washington spent 12 years as a commercial pilot before joining FAA investigations. They are among our most respected professionals. The room watches security footage from the airport, then passenger video from inside the aircraft. The evidence is overwhelming and damning. Deputy Administrator Michael Carter, no relation to the passenger Robert Carter, speaks up. "What's our legal exposure here?" "Substantial," replies Chief Counsel Sandra Martinez. "We're looking at federal civil rights violations, aviation safety violations, and potential criminal charges. But more importantly, this exposes systematic discrimination that could affect every airline's operating license." Meanwhile, at airline headquarters, CEO Michael Harrison paces his corner office like a caged animal. His phone hasn't stopped ringing since the story broke. The board of directors, major investors, and the company's insurance carriers all want immediate answers. His chief legal officer, David Park, spreads documents across the conference table. "Michael, this is worse than we initially thought. I've reviewed Karen Mitchell's personnel file. 23 discrimination complaints in 5 years, and we have documentation showing management was aware of the pattern." Harrison's face reddens. "Why wasn't she terminated years ago?" "Because HR treated each incident as isolated customer service issues. They never connected the dots to see the discriminatory pattern. And honestly, middle management didn't want to deal with the paperwork." Head of Human Resources Janet Walsh enters with another stack of files. "I've interviewed 15 crew members about Karen's behavior. The statements are troubling." She reads from her notes. Flight attendant Maria Rodriguez filed 2 formal complaints about Karen's inappropriate comments about passengers of color. Lead flight attendant Brad Stevens documented 3 incidents where Karen questioned black passengers' ticket validity without cause. Captain Williams reported that Karen frequently made jokes about passenger demographics. "And what action did we take?" Harrison asks, though he already knows the answer. "Customer service retraining, verbal counseling. We moved her between different flight routes to avoid problem passengers." Janet's voice grows quieter. "We essentially enabled her behavior." Park pulls up social media monitoring on his laptop. "It gets worse. Former passengers are coming forward with their own Karen Mitchell stories. We're up to 37 documented incidents now, and the number is growing hourly." The trending hashtag #KarenOnTheAirplane has sparked a flood of testimony from travelers who experienced similar treatment. Each story follows the same pattern: assumptions about economic status, demands for additional verification, and humiliating public confrontations. At the federal building, Delia and Trevor are providing detailed testimony to a panel of investigators. Their account is methodical, professional, and devastating. "Describe Miss Mitchell's initial approach," requests Special Agent Jennifer Kim from the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Delia refers to her contemporaneous notes. At 8:47 a.m., she approached our seats and immediately stated, "There's been a mistake with your seating. These seats are for paying customers." Her tone and body language indicated she had already concluded we didn't belong in first class. "What specific actions did she take that violated federal aviation regulations?" asks FAA Inspector General Robert Martinez. Trevor opens his investigation tablet. "She demanded financial documentation not required of other passengers in violation of 14 CFR 250.9. She forcibly removed paying passengers without safety justification, violating 14 CFR 121.580. She created a discriminatory environment that compromised crew resource management protocols. The investigators are particularly interested in the airline's response after learning about the inspectors' identities." "Did airline management express any concern about systemic discrimination issues?" Agent Kim asks. "Initially, their focus was entirely on damage control," Delia replies. "Airport Manager Carter immediately offered standard compensation packages. There was no acknowledgement of civil rights violations until we identified ourselves as federal inspectors." Special Agent Kim makes detailed notes. "And what was Miss Mitchell's reaction upon learning your identities?" "Terror," Trevor says bluntly. followed by attempts to justify her actions and blame company policies. Back at the airline's crisis management center, the situation continues deteriorating. Stock prices have dropped 12% in after-hours trading. Corporate sponsors are reconsidering partnerships. Employee morale is plummeting as crews worry about federal investigations of their own behavior. CEO Harrison authorizes an emergency meeting with Karen Mitchell and her legal representation. The conference room feels like a tribunal as Karen sits across from corporate executives, legal teams, and HR officials. Karen's attorney, Thomas Bradley, speaks first. My client maintains she was following established protocols for verifying passenger credentials. Chief Legal Officer Park slides a thick folder across the table. Mr. Bradley, these are federal aviation regulations regarding passenger treatment. Please show me which protocol authorizes racial profiling. Bradley's confidence falters as he reviews the documentation. My client's actions weren't based on race. They were based on legitimate security concerns. What security concerns? Park presses. 2 passengers with valid tickets, proper identification, and no history of aviation violations? Karen finally speaks, her voice barely above a whisper. I was trained to watch for fraud, suspicious booking patterns, passengers who seemed out of place. Define out of place, requests HR Director Walsh. The question hangs in the air. Everyone knows what Karen means, but no one wants to say it explicitly. You know, Karen says defensively, people who don't fit the typical first-class passenger profile. And what profile is that? Walsh continues. Karen's lawyer tries to intervene, but she's already committed to her answer. Wealthy people, business executives, people who can afford premium travel. How do you identify wealth by looking at someone? Park asks. Karen realizes she's trapped herself, but pride won't let her stop. Experience, 12 years of working first-class cabins. You learn to recognize the difference between real customers and people gaming the system. The legal team exchanges glances. Karen has just provided them with a textbook definition of discriminatory profiling. Park continues his methodical questioning. In your 12 years of experience, how many white passengers have you asked to provide credit cards as proof of purchase? The question strikes like lightning. Karen's mouth opens and closes, but no sound emerges. How many white passengers have you accused of using charity upgrades? Park presses. I treat all passengers the same. We have statements from 43 passengers who disagree. Walsh interrupts, reading from her tablet. 43 passengers of color who report discriminatory treatment, 0 complaints from white passengers about verification demands. The confrontation reaches its climax when Park plays audio recordings from the aircraft incident. Karen's voice fills the room with damning clarity. People who clearly can't afford first class, you two obviously aren't executives. The welfare section is in the back. Miss Mitchell, Park says with prosecutorial precision, you humiliated federal aviation inspectors in front of 60 witnesses because of their race. You violated their civil rights, damaged this company's reputation, and triggered a federal investigation that could cost us our operating license. Karen breaks down completely. I didn't know they were inspectors. If you had known what? Park interrupts. Is discrimination illegal? That federal law applies to everyone regardless of their job title? Her attorney finally succeeds in stopping her testimony, but the damage is irreversible. Every word has been recorded, every admission documented. CEO Harrison delivers the inevitable verdict. Miss Mitchell, your employment is terminated immediately for cause. You're banned from airline property and will be reported to industry databases to prevent future employment with any carrier. But Karen's personal consequences are just the beginning. The federal investigation has uncovered systematic failures that demand comprehensive reform. At FBI headquarters, Special Agent Kim briefs Director of Civil Rights Division Patricia Johnson on the expanding investigation. Director, we've identified patterns of discrimination across multiple airlines, but this carrier shows the most egregious systematic failures. We're recommending federal charges against the individual employee, plus comprehensive civil rights enforcement against the corporation. What about the broader industry? Johnson asks. This case is going to force industry-wide changes. No airline wants to be the next one in federal court explaining why they ignored discrimination complaints. As news of the federal investigation spreads, other airlines begin emergency reviews of their own discrimination complaint records. What they discover is disturbing. Similar patterns of ignored complaints, inadequate training, and permissive cultures that enabled discriminatory behavior. The Karen Mitchell case has become a watershed moment for civil rights in commercial aviation. Federal investigators are uncovering decades of systematic discrimination that airlines treated as minor customer service issues. But the most powerful moment comes when 78-year-old Margaret Williams, a retired schoolteacher from Detroit, provides testimony about her own experiences with Karen Mitchell. "I flew to see my grandchildren twice a year," she tells investigators through tears. "Every time that woman made me feel like I was stealing something. She'd ask to see my credit card, question my ticket, make me feel ashamed for being first class." Margaret pauses, gathering strength. "For 40 years, I thought that was just how flying worked for people like me. I never knew I could complain. I never knew anyone would listen." Her testimony became the emotional centerpiece of the federal case. Margaret represents thousands of passengers who silently endured discrimination because they believed the system would never change. But the system is about to change dramatically. The federal investigation has documented not just individual racism, but institutional failures that enabled and protected discriminatory behavior for years. The consequences will reshape the entire aviation industry's approach to civil rights compliance. Justice is no longer just coming. It's arrived with the full force of federal law enforcement. 6 months after that fateful morning flight, the federal district courthouse in Washington, D.C. buzzes with media attention and public interest. Today marks the culmination of the most significant civil rights case in aviation history. Judge Patricia Williams, no relation to passenger Margaret Williams, calls the packed courtroom to order. Representatives from major airlines, civil rights organizations, and aviation industry groups fill every available seat. "We are here today for the final hearing in the matter of Washington v. Skyline Airlines and Mitchell," Judge Williams announces. "This case has revealed systematic discrimination that demands comprehensive judicial response." At the plaintiff's table, Delia and Trevor sit with Department of Justice attorneys who have spent months building an airtight case. At the defense table, Skyline Airlines' legal team looks defeated, surrounded by boxes of damaging evidence they cannot refute. Karen Mitchell is notably absent. She pled guilty to federal civil rights violations 3 weeks earlier, accepting a plea agreement that includes permanent banishment from the aviation industry and 2 years of community service with civil rights organizations. Judge Williams reviews the findings with methodical precision. The evidence shows defendant Mitchell committed deliberate, repeated acts of racial discrimination against passengers over a 5-year period. More disturbing, defendant Skyline Airlines had documented knowledge of this pattern and failed to take corrective action. She turns to the airline's representatives. "CEO Harrison, your company received 47 formal discrimination complaints about Ms. Mitchell. Your response was customer service training and route reassignments. You enabled discriminatory behavior through institutional negligence." Harrison stands, his voice strained. "Your Honor, the airline accepts full responsibility for these failures. We have implemented comprehensive reforms." "Mr. Harrison," Judge Williams interrupts, "your reforms were prompted by federal investigation, not corporate conscience. This court will ensure lasting change through judicial enforcement." The judge announces the penalties with devastating precision. Skyline Airlines will pay $2.3 million in federal civil rights fines, the largest such penalty in aviation history. An additional $850,000 victim compensation fund will provide restitution to affected passengers. The courtroom stirs as the financial implications sink in. But Judge Williams isn't finished. Furthermore, Skyline Airlines will operate under federal civil rights monitoring for 24 months. Quarterly FAA inspections will assess compliance with anti-discrimination protocols. Any future violations will result in immediate license suspension. She continues with operational requirements that will transform the airline industry. All crew members will complete 40 hours of federal civil rights training annually. Passenger complaint systems will be restructured with mandatory federal reporting of discrimination allegations. Corporate executives will face personal liability for enabling discriminatory practices. At the witness table, Delia rises to deliver her victim impact statement. Her voice carries the authority of someone who has dedicated her career to aviation safety and civil rights. Your Honor, this case represents more than individual discrimination. It exposes systematic failures that compromise aviation safety. When crew members make decisions based on racial bias rather than professional protocols, they endanger everyone aboard the aircraft. She gestures toward the gallery where Margaret Williams and other victims sit with quiet dignity. These passengers deserve more than compensation. They deserve an aviation industry that values civil rights as much as operational profits. They deserve crews trained to serve all passengers with equal professionalism and respect. Judge Williams nods approvingly. Inspector Washington, your testimony highlights the intersection between civil rights and public safety. This court recognizes that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's operationally dangerous. The judge's final announcement sends shockwaves through the aviation industry. This court orders the Federal Aviation Administration to establish new civil rights enforcement protocols for all commercial carriers. Discrimination complaints will trigger mandatory federal investigations. Airlines that fail to address systematic bias will face license revocation. As the gavel falls, the implications ripple beyond the courtroom. Within hours, 12 major airlines announce voluntary adoption of Skyline's court-mandated reforms. Industry executives recognize that proactive compliance is cheaper than federal enforcement. At Skyline Airlines headquarters, the transformation is already visible. Brad Stevens, promoted to Director of Diversity and Inclusion, oversees comprehensive crew retraining programs. Captain Rodriguez, now Chief Safety Culture Officer, ensures that civil rights compliance is integrated into all operational procedures. The Victim Compensation Program has distributed funds to 63 passengers who experienced discrimination. Margaret Williams used her settlement to establish a scholarship fund for young people pursuing careers in transportation equity. But perhaps the most significant change is cultural. Airport Security Chief David Kim reports a 340% increase in passengers reporting discriminatory treatment. People aren't accepting discrimination silently anymore, he explains. They know their rights and expect airlines to respect them. The case has established legal precedent that extends far beyond aviation. Transportation companies across all industries are reviewing their civil rights compliance, recognizing that discrimination carries federal consequences. 6 months after being humiliated and removed from first class, Delia and Trevor have achieved something remarkable: systematic change enforced by federal law, protecting future travelers from the discrimination they experienced. Justice hasn't just been served, it's been institutionalized. 1 year later, the transformation is undeniable. At Skyline Airlines Training Center in Atlanta, new flight attendants complete their final day of mandatory civil rights education. The 40-hour curriculum, developed under federal oversight, has become the industry gold standard. Instructor Brad Stevens addresses the graduating class with hard-earned wisdom. Your job isn't just passenger safety, it's passenger dignity. Every person who boards your aircraft deserves equal treatment regardless of their appearance, accent, or assumptions you might make about their background. He clicks a slide showing passenger satisfaction scores. Our customer ratings have improved 34% since implementing these protocols. Turns out, treating people with respect is good business. The ripple effects extend far beyond one airline. The Federal Aviation Administration reports that industry-wide discrimination complaints have dropped 67%, while passenger reporting of incidents has increased dramatically. The message is clear: discrimination still happens, but it's no longer tolerated or ignored. Margaret Williams, now 79, sits in first class on her quarterly flight to visit grandchildren in Seattle. The same route where Karen Mitchell once humiliated her is now staffed by crews trained in federal civil rights protocols. The flight attendant greets her warmly, no questions asked, no assumptions made. It's amazing how different flying feels when you're treated like a human being, Margaret reflects, gazing out the window at clouds that once symbolized barriers but now represent freedom. At FAA headquarters, Delia and Trevor continue their inspection work with renewed purpose. Their case has given them tools they never had before: federal civil rights enforcement authority that makes airlines take discrimination seriously. We're still finding problems, Delia explains to a congressional oversight committee, but now airlines fix them instead of hiding them. The industry knows we're watching, and passengers know they have rights. Trevor adds, the most important change is cultural. Crew members understand that discrimination isn't just wrong, it's career-ending. That creates powerful incentives for professional behavior. The broader impact reaches beyond aviation. The case has inspired civil rights enforcement in other transportation sectors. Bus companies, train operators, and ride-share services are all implementing similar anti-discrimination protocols. Robert Carter, the businessman who recorded the original incident, has parlayed his viral video into a non-profit organization advocating for passenger rights. His Travel Equality Now Foundation has documented over 200 successful discrimination interventions. One video changed everything, Carter reflects. But real change happened because people like Delia and Trevor had the authority to enforce consequences. We need more of that, accountability with teeth. Even Karen Mitchell's story offers a complex lesson. Now working retail in her hometown, she's completed court-mandated community service with the NAACP. The experience has been transformative, though the aviation industry remains permanently closed to her. I had to lose everything to understand how much damage I was doing, she admitted in a recent interview. I hope other people learn from my mistakes instead of repeating them. The transformation isn't perfect. Discrimination hasn't disappeared entirely. But systematic change has created an environment where civil rights violations trigger swift, serious consequences. Real change doesn't happen overnight, and it's never complete, but it happens when people refuse to accept discrimination as normal, when institutions face meaningful accountability for enabling bias, when witnesses speak up instead of staying silent, and when professionals use their authority to protect civil rights rather than ignore violations. Have you experienced or witnessed discrimination during travel? Your story matters. Share it in the comments below. If you believe accountability and justice create lasting change, hit that like button to support this message. Subscribe to Blacktail Stories for more stories proving that ordinary people can create extraordinary progress when they refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Share this video with someone who needs to see that speaking up against discrimination isn't just right, it's powerful.